Welcome back to the podcast Indestructible Souls, mental wellness for African American men and boys. Happy Sunday to you. Hope you enjoyed your day. I spent a lot of my morning out on the golf course in the heat, and so here I am. So today we're going to continue our discussion on trauma in the black community, but more specifically for black males. And last week we talked a lot about what trauma looks like, the importance of addressing trauma in the black community, particularly black men and boys. And we're going to go a little further. I'm going to do a little quick recap. However, today we're going to focus on how to recognize trauma, but I'm going to spend a little bit of time on sexual abuse and sexual trauma among black boys, something that almost never gets talked about. And in fact, for those who are courageous enough to report it and bring it to the forefront, it almost always never gets addressed or rarely gets handled appropriately. So we're going to get into that. So I just want to recap real quick when we talk about in the black community and we're dealing with different types of trauma. Last week we talked about acute trauma, we talked about complex trauma, and we talked about long-term chronic trauma. So one of the things I did say I was going to bring back up is when we look at, for the black community, especially in black boys, we talk about complex trauma, but one of the things I talked about was what we call adverse childhood experiences. And one of the reasons why for us as African American boys, we experience so much trauma, and in fact, us as a people experience so much trauma and don't even realize it, is because it happens so often and sometimes happens so subtly that we don't even know that it's taking place. So before I get started, I want to give a shout out to my cousin, Maurice Griffin. Today is his birthday. I think he like 50 something. I don't know. He gonna get mad at me for saying that. But I think he's 49. But he getting up there. Happy birthday. We love you. So let's get to it. So when we talk about trauma for African American boys, which then turn into teenagers, which then turn into men, the reason why this is so important, these are the men and these are the boys that our daughters marry, that you're currently married to, that you're currently raising, and so forth. So here are 10 predictors that we always assess as therapists when we talk about adverse childhood experiences. So I still don't have this technology figured out to put it up on the screen, so I'm just going to read them to you. Now, go down the list, and then I'm going to go down the list and ask yourself how many of these apply to you. And so when we talk about adverse childhood experiences, I'm going to tell you who the people who experience these, have these experiences, I'm going to tell you what the predictors are. So one of the things is loss of a parent. So that loss of a parent can be to prison. That loss of a parent can be to death. That loss of a parent can be to abandonment. Any type of loss of a specific parent is one of the predictors that when we talk about adverse childhood experiences. So if you grew up with a parent in and out of prison, if you grew up with a parent who was a drug addict who was not at home, if you grew up with a parent who abandoned you, whatever it may be. So then the next one on that list is a parent with a mental illness. How many of our parents in the black community not only may have a mental illness, but have a mental illness that's untreated because we don't believe in going into therapy? So if a child has an absent parent, but then say that parent who's left has a mental illness, or you have one parent that has a mental illness. Physical abuse. So when we look at physical abuse, that's also a predictor of how your lifespan is going to go. Sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical neglect. Now, what is physical neglect? Parent may be present, but are your child's needs being met physically? Clothing, food, exercise, letting your child sit in front of the game all day and feeding them, letting them eat top ramen and cupcakes is physical neglect. Emotional neglect. I can't tell you how many children or how many people come to me for therapy that their emotional needs as a child are not being met. Household domestic violence is another predictor when we talk about adverse childhood experiences. A household member in and out of jail or in jail. And last but not least, a parent with a substance abuse problem. So one of the things we do when we assess kids, and I even look for adults, when an adult come to me and they have a history of trauma, when they come to me and they have a history of depression, a history of anxiety, whatever it may be, these are the things that I assess for to see how we got here. Now, here's some of the things that we talk about that's a result of these adverse childhood experiences real quick. Early death, disease, disability, social problems, poor health, heart disease, things like that, social emotional impairments, cognitive impairments. A lot of times our kids come to us and they may be diagnosed with a learning disability, and actually that's a result of trauma. So when we talk about trauma, and I said this last week, when someone experiences trauma over and over and over and over again, it does have physiological effects. So one of the things in my main topic for today, I just wanted to recap that, is what happens when we discover one of our kids have been abused or traumatized. What do you think happens? Now, specifically today, I'm going to talk about boys and sexual abuse. Something that a lot of us don't want to talk about, and some of us may have never talked about it. And here's part of the problem. Let me give this caveat real quick. One of the things and one of the problems with even having this topic is that there's very little data or very little information out there when it comes to sexual abuse in Black boys. For one reason, and probably the main reason, is we don't tell. It is the family secret. It is something we don't talk about. And I'm going to tell you some of the things that I see, and there is data to back it, of when we begin to look at trauma and we begin to look at abuse. I'm not going to say almost all times, but a lot of times we as parents or caregivers get it wrong and we re-traumatize. Now, not only do we teach our kids to not tell, when they tell, things get worse. Believe it or not, a lot of times when our kids report they're being abused, they're being traumatized, things get worse, and we're going to cover some of that. So let me start here. So one of the things we always teach our kids, including my grandson, is stranger danger, stranger danger. We have taught him that which body parts are not okay for someone to touch, right? Okay. So for a boy, obviously it's his private parts. For a girl, anywhere that she can wear a bikini it's inappropriate for someone to touch. And then We teach our kids all the time about stranger danger, stranger danger. Here's the problem with trauma. Here's the problem with sexual trauma. 95% of the time, it's not a stranger. 95% of the time that someone is sexually abused, someone is sexually assaulted, is by a caregiver, a parent, or someone that they know. Think about that. So while we're teaching our kids, and I'm not saying they don't get assaulted or that strangers aren't dangerous, but 95% of the danger comes from within the family, something we don't want to talk about. Why is that important to bring up when we talk about trauma? Here's what I see happen. And for the life of me, I have never figured it out. I don't understand why. 9 times out of 10, when trauma is discovered, when sexual abuse is discovered, for some reason, the family ostracizes the victim. The family protects the perpetrator. The family stigmatizes the victim. Oftentimes, it gets worse for that person who's being victimized, while the family, for whatever reason, is protecting the perpetrator. So why would a person tell? Now, so I'm actually got a little bit ahead of myself, but I think that's a good way to start this, is that 95%, and I really want to stress that, 95% of people who are being sexually abused, specifically to boys, black boys, 95% is somebody that they know. Here's the confusing part, is that the person who's hurting me is also telling me that they love me. Then we wonder why we get so confused about what love should look like. Mama and daddy's beating each other up, and then they call that love. The person who is sexually assaulting me calling that love. The person who is damaging my self-esteem is also supposed to be the person who's protecting me and who tells me that they love me. The sad part about it is we are sometimes more at risk in our own families than we are out in the street. Why do you think we have so many runaways? Think about it. But I'm going to give you guys some facts real quick when we talk about black boys and sexual abuse, but something we don't ever talk about. When was the last time that you heard any kind of discussion on sexual assault when it comes to black boys? And I get it. We're in the Me Too movement. I understand it. I support it to a degree, but we won't talk about that today. The only thing I don't support it is that people are guilty or crucified before any facts come out. But okay. All right. I digress. 1 in 6, this is just reported. 1 in 6 black boys or black men have experienced some type of sexual abuse as children. 1 in 6. So if you're in the barbershop and you got 6 chairs, one of those guys in those chairs have been sexually abused or sexually assaulted as a child. Some people probably would have thought that it was a lot less than that. The problem is we don't discuss this. Here's another problem with just parents in general, is that oftentimes 2 things. Sex isn't talked about in the family. It's something that you're just not supposed to do. So sex isn't talked about. But then on the flip side of it, follow this, on the flip side of it, boys in general, but we're talking about black boys, we're pressured to have sex or to be sexually active at an early age. Because look how confusing that is. We equate sexuality and sex to manhood, and so therefore we pressure our boys into sexual activity at an early age. But the problem is, not only Is it not right? It's not age appropriate, not mentally prepared for it. And here's what happens. Here's what happens. So you'll get a young boy, 10, 11 years old, having sex with an adult female, and then wonder why they're screwed up in the head. On the flip side of that, some people will say, oh, he's the man. He's 11. Should he be having sexual activities with an 18-year-old, a 19-year-old? No. And as things, when we talk about trauma, so then now we wonder why people are emotionally immature, emotionally damaged, can't commit, have trouble with anger, have trouble with expressing emotion, so forth and so on. But think about it. 1 in 6 of black males have had some type of sexual trauma, sexual abuse as a child. 1 in 6. Something we very rarely talk about. And I've already discussed some of the reasons. The problem is that our view of sex and sexuality is never discussed, is never taught, and then it becomes confusing because on one hand we're young and we're immature, and then on the other hand, we as black boys, we are pressured into having sex at a very early age. Think about that. So I want to revisit this real quick. When we talk about abuse cases, sexual abuse cases, 95%. Here's the thing, and this is going back to the stranger danger. And we're talking about how trauma is discovered. Most of the time, it's discovered because they told a friend. Maybe the family figured it out. Most often, maybe they go to the school and they say something to the teacher, they say something to the nurse, they may say something to a trusted person. Then here's what happens. Sometimes, even if it's believed, the system comes in and then they disrupt the family. If it's a boyfriend, sometimes mama don't want to lose out on what the boyfriend is bringing into the house. So then the victim is then to deal with it. Sometimes it's a close family friend, somebody that y'all calling y'all play cousin. Sometimes it's like I said, it's a family friend. Sure, it could be the babysitter, but 95% of the time, it's somebody in the household. Think about that. Now check this out. Here's, like I said, the numbers for black boys is not going to be accurate. So they're saying of all sexual abuse cases, 14% are African American men or African American boys. Right? The problem with that, how many of those go unreported? Here's another reason why it goes unreported. For one, they get re-victimized. For two, then now especially if it's done by another male, their sexuality then becomes into question, even though they're the victim. Think about that. So when we talk about sexual abuse for African American boys, it is not something that should be taken lightly. Now, for the simple fact that now this person is damaged for the rest of their life. Now, here's the kicker. Here's the kicker, and here's something I really want you guys to think about. Trying to find my notes. This is a known fact. So this ain't something that I thought about. This is a known fact. Can't explain why. And then we wonder why things are generational. Here we go. For a lot of us, and when I mean, and a lot of times when I use us, I include myself in there, and I may or may not have experienced some things, but I don't like saying y'all and things like that. So I say we, us, that sort of thing. People turn to, when we talk about trauma, people turn to what broke them. And I'm going to explain that. People turn to what broke them. Here's the thing about trauma. If I was broken by sexual abuse, what do you think I'm going to do? Because trauma victims turn to what broke them. That's why when you look at sexual perpetrators, and this isn't to make excuses, this is just facts. Most often, and a lot of times, they get the abuse gets discovered because they get caught doing it to someone else. Follow me on this. And I'm trying to stay on the topic of sexual abuse. If I'm sexually abused, sometimes it's going to be discovered because I'm sexually acting out or I'm doing something to somebody else. I worked in a group home, it was a long time ago. I'm not going to say the name of the group home or the city or whatever. However, it was a group home for boys, and all of them were considered sexual perpetrators. One of the things they encouraged us to do was to read their charts. Right? Not going to go into detail about what was in the charts, but here's what was consistent across the board. Is that they were in there for sexually abusing most likely a younger sibling or something to that degree. When you read the chart, guess what it was? They were already sexually assaulted by another family member, by another person. And you would think if they're harmed by that and they didn't like it, why would they then do it to somebody else? Here's the best explanation that I've been able to research. People turn to what broke them. We do it all the time. You oftentimes see women who get into domestic violence relationships, and what do? Keep getting into domestic violence relationships. They turn to what broke them. People who have sexual histories or sexual abuse history, we already gave an example of that. People who have been broken by, say, substance abuse, then you wonder why they keep turning to that. People oftentimes, and I'm not saying people, I'm saying people who have experienced trauma. You wonder why gang members or people out in the street just don't stop. Why do they keep doing it? Because we turn to what broke us. It's even biblical. We become what we hate. Chew on that for a minute. Now, back to this whole, so when we talk about the sexual abuse and then working in this group home, now what happened is they were sexually assaulted. They then turned around and get sexually assault someone else. Now let's look back at history. I see a lot of families where it becomes almost a part of the family heritage where grandpa touched mama, then uncle touched somebody else, and then guess what happens? The families begin to bury it, and then here comes along, say, my client, and it gets shut down because nobody wants to tell the family secret that Uncle June then touched so-and-so, but then also grandpa, and then y'all got these play cousins over there, and then you wondering why they always want to play with the kids. And then you want to run off and then leave them and have them as babysitters. Here's the thing. Damn stranger danger. It's in the house. It's in the family. It's in the circle. So here's the thing. We need to start teaching our kids, for one, about sex, what that is. We need to start teaching our kids about sexual safety. And we need to start protecting our kids by not, and here's the thing, I could care less who it is. When my niece comes to me. She gives me a hug. I get on the knee. I give her a hug. Okay, whatever it may be, right? But me as a man, I'm not going to sit there and if she has to go to the bathroom, somebody else got to do that. I'm not going to be like, oh, I got it. It's inappropriate. But what I'm saying is, you have these close family members, you have the uncles and all of these other things, and people know their history. Stop putting your kids in danger. It ain't outside the family, it's in the family. And we all know, can't nobody hurt you like a friend or a family member. I know this is a touchy subject, but guess what? It needs to be talked about. Now let me shift a half a notch. I'm going to give you some information on how to recognize trauma, how to recognize sexual trauma. Here's the thing. I have counseled both boys and girls who have experienced sexual trauma, and it gets confusing. It gets confusing. Here's the thing, and they get blamed for it. The little girls get blamed for, oh, you're just being fast. Or why didn't you tell me? Here's the one thing that drives me the craziest about parents. When they find out that their child was sexually assaulted or sexually abused, they make it about them and not about the child. Here's the thing, and I'm gonna tell you this, and take what you will with it. If your child reveals that they were sexually assaulted, I don't care if they 50. I don't care if they tell you as an adult. It is your job to simply validate and support, not make it about you. Did you fail to protect them? Sure. Of course you did. Now you take that to therapy. It's your job to protect that child, and I don't care if that child is 50. When they tell you and they say they experienced this, don't ask them why didn't they tell. They didn't tell because, for one, most of y'all are not going to believe them. For two, the fake uncle was over there paying the rent, so you ain't going to kick out the fake uncle because then you'll be homeless. I digress again. Now, I will say this, and this just brought this case into my head, and I'm not going to give too much details. Not even going to say male or female. A young person was being sexually assaulted by their natural father. By their natural father for a span of, 4 or 5 years, somewhere in there. Somewhere in there. Here's a perfect example. The mom took that child and the rest of the kids and left. Called the police. CFS got involved. All that good stuff. Took the child to the doctor. All of these things. I'm treating the trauma, but mom got out. And I'm happy to say she slept in a hotel for a little while, got an apartment, got back on their feet, got all the kids treatment, got all the kids therapy, and then they all begin to thrive. But some of y'all ain't gonna want to give up y'all Section 8 to check y'all to save y'all kids. But okay, all right, my bad. Let me stop. All right, now here's how to start to recognize if your child is being victimized. Here's just a few caveats on if your child is being victimized. So some of the most obvious is a change in personality, a change in behavior. If for some reason you know your child's personality, and then all of a sudden you start to realize, okay, something's different. Something's quite right. Yeah, everybody can have an off day. But if you start to notice some personality change where they're normally happy and talkative, they're isolating, they're fearful, and they're just not themselves, red flag. For younger kids, bedwetting or peeing on themselves. If they're potty trained and all of a sudden they're wetting the bed and things like that, red flag. Separation anxiety. You have a kid and you go to the store and you can normally leave them with your other kids. Now all of a sudden they become clingy and they don't want you to go, red flag. Change in grades, red flag. A couple of other things, and I want to get all of these right. Overall behavioral problems. Now all of a sudden they're irritable, angry, fighting all the time, talking back. Here's the thing. One of the things, we got to increase communication and we got to teach our kids to learn how to communicate. But the problem is kids act out because they don't talk it out. Sometimes they don't have the language or the vocabulary to talk it out, so they act out. So if all of a sudden they're have these behavioral problems at home, at school, and this is just not my kid, red flag. All of a sudden they're isolating from their friends or difficulty making friends. All of a sudden appearance changes. They used to like wearing pink flowers and all of a sudden they got on all black. Red flag. If they're talking about, and there's more, I can't. They lost their confidence, their self-esteem, red flag. Here's another thing. Complaining of headaches and stomach problems. If they start to have physical ailments and you take them to the doctor and the doctor say nothing wrong with them, but they keep having them, red flag. It is our job as parents, when we're paying attention. Now, here's the thing. Do sometimes kids fabricate stories? Okay. You may have some troubled teens out there that fabricate stories. It happens. But if your child is telling you and you see the signs that something is wrong when we talk about sexual abuse, and you see that something is wrong, it is your obligation as a parent to address that. Now, will the discovery of that abuse change your entire family? 1,000%. Let me tell you a story real quick, and then I'm going to start wrapping this up. And I know this is about boys and so forth, but I got to tell this story, which is not related to a boy. And then I'm going to talk about just another topic real quick. Early on in my career as a counselor, and some of you know, I worked in a female prison, worked in a women's prison, and God sent me there. That's all I can say. Here it is. I have a college degree, and I need a job. They're hiring for the drug and alcohol program at CIW. I applied for it. They hired me. Probably for a year, I was like, why in the hell did they hire me? I didn't get it. Okay. So one of the things we were required to do, even as drug and alcohol counselors, was to do one-on-one counseling, didn't call it therapy, one-on-one counseling with our clients. We had a caseload. We had to do one-on-one therapy with our clients. And this young girl, early 20s. And I had to earn her trust first. So she would literally come to her 30-minute session and she was like, I'm going to give you a chance, but I don't know yet. So we would come and, I go over her homework with her, she had to figure out if she was going to trust me or not. In fact, starting out, she wanted another female counselor to be in the room. And so Me and my good friend Tori was my road dog back in the prison, Miss Tori Cook. She would come in and we would sort of counsel this young girl together because she didn't want to be in the room with her, with just me. I get it 100%. So over time, she became more comfortable with me and so forth. But she shared a story of her trauma, which was obviously she was sexually assaulted and raped by a family friend. Family friend. Now, that's tragic enough. That's tragic enough. Here's the kicker. When her dad discovered it, her father discovered it. It was the father's friend. After the father discovered it, not only did he continue to be friends with the person who violated his daughter, but not only he did not do nothing about it, didn't call the police, he protected the friend. Don't know why. To this day, don't know why. Now, in counseling this young lady, the sexual assault was one thing, but the major betrayal was dad. She got re-victimized and re-traumatized all over again because of the betrayal. So parents, when we are not addressing and we're not protecting our kids and we don't believe them and we don't respond well, they are re-traumatized all over again. All over again. So here's the thing. We have to open up communication with our kids, especially boys. We have to, as men, have to not pressure our boys to start having sex too soon. We have to talk about what sex is at an age appropriate time. We got to start talking about body parts and all those things. But at the family functions and all that stuff, we got to keep our eyes open. I don't care if we're at the family event. There's no strangers at the family event. We have to protect, and we know who in our family, I'm just going to say it. We know who our family it has the propensity of touching kids and things like that. Period. Don't care how you feel about it. We know who they are. Now, when it comes to sexual trauma, it is one of the toughest things to get over. I can't tell you how many times people come to therapy as adults because of childhood trauma of sexual assault or molestation as early as 3, 5 years old, as early as they can remember. But here they are sitting here 40, 50 years old, still traumatized by it, still trying to work through it, and can't understand why they can't be successful at relationships. 95% of people who are sexually assaulted or something like that or abused is by a family member or a close relative or a close friend. So pay attention, ask questions, make it safe. I can't say this most importantly. Make it safe for kids to talk about this. As parents, you have to make it safe. For one, don't make it seem like they did anything wrong. So, girls get blamed for, oh, you was being fast. No, that's not the case. Then boys, their overall sexuality becomes into question, but they're the victims. We have to pay attention and we have to be vigilant and stay alert. Now, I know this ain't a topic that, folks really want to talk about, but the platform is to have, those provocative conversations and those conversations that we don't want to talk about. How else are we going to get better? Now, Do are there is sexual assault and molestation a bigger problem for girls and women? Sure. Not even going to dispute that. But 1 in 6 men have had some type of sexual abuse or sexual as a child, right? Remember, people turn to what hurt them. So then it becomes generational and so forth and so on. These young boys then become our fathers, brothers, all that stuff. So something is very important that we address and that we pay attention to. So the reality is it's an issue. It's something we need to learn about. It's something we need to pay attention to. Now, I want to thank you all for tuning in, paying attention. You can follow me on, you can catch this podcast on Facebook Live. I'm supposed to be on YouTube, but it's still not working. You can check it out on Twitter. But I would like for you to send any questions or comments. You could send it directly through messaging. And also, if I'm always looking for someone to interview and things like that. So if there's a specific topic you want to talk about, if there's a topic you want me to cover, just hit me up. And this is Indestructible Soul, mental wellness for African American men and boys. And I'm going to see you next Sunday. And thank you for tuning in and thank you for participating.